Good morning. That's better. On switch. Works wonders. It's good to see everyone on this rainy, somewhat chilly fall morning. Hope you all have had a good weekend and that you didn't have any trouble getting here. We are in John chapter 10 today. Bart is out today, so he asked me to fill in for him. And so I'm happy to do that because this is a great study that Bart has been leading, and I've enjoyed preparing for this. I hope I give you something that is worthwhile today. We're in John chapter 10. A little bit of review of chapter 9 because I think chapter 10, not just follows in the text, but also follows it chronologically and topically. Last week we read about this man who was born blind, and Jesus healed him. That was a significant miracle for more than one reason. Jesus healed other blind men. He healed other diseases. Other people had healed people throughout the history of the Jewish people of some serious diseases, but a man who was 40 years old and had been blind from birth, no one had ever heard of that before. No one had ever healed a man born blind. So this was a big deal, and the Jewish leaders immediately started to put some heat on this man. So the man was healed by Jesus, and then he spoke the truth about it. He spoke everything he knew. At first he didn't know that much, but when he found out the truth, he spoke that. And he was bold and fearless and very truthful and simple in his responses to the Jewish leaders. And so they persecuted him. It says they cast him out. There's some question as to whether that means they simply ejected him from the assembly in which they were examining him, or if they actually excommunicated him, put him out of the synagogue where he could not participate in the worship of the Jewish community anymore, which would be a very serious thing. If you look at the text, you might see a footnote that says excommunicated. I'm not sure how much debate there is on that, but in any event, they persecuted him. And then the leaders challenged Jesus later on, and at the end he says, he's talking about, he came so that the blind might have sight and those who see might be blind. And the Jewish leaders say, well, are we blind? And Jesus says, if you were blind, you wouldn't be a sinner. But now that if you say that you see, then your sin remains. You know what you're doing. The Pharisees' priority was not the truth. That was clear. In their examinations of this man, the man seemed to want to tell the truth, and he knew the truth. Nobody wanted to hear the truth. They wanted him to say what they wanted to hear, and he was not going to say it. That was the whole problem with this interaction between the leaders and this man. It's not just the Pharisees, but the Jewish leaders did not want to be told the truth, even when it was obvious. And this man embarrassed them somewhat by making it so obvious that they couldn't deny it. And so they had to get rid of him. Like, we don't want to hear you. We don't want you here anymore saying these obviously truthful things that we don't want to hear. So they cast him out. So it's clear that their priority is not the truth. And that brings us to John chapter 10. And there are some who suggest that John 10, it looks to me in the text as if it flows directly. Like these events follow immediately on those of chapter 9, and it's all one happening. I did run across a suggestion that John 10 may have happened up to 3 months after John 9. I don't think so, and if I think of it as we're going through, I'll tell you why, but it looks like it happened right afterwards. But even if it didn't, there's probably a reason that John put it here. thematically it fits here. Even that's why, I mean, there's a lot of things that happen that John did not include in his gospel, and a lot, the things that are here because they thematically fit with what he's trying to get across to us. So even if this had happened later, John put it here because it belongs here in his in what he is trying to tell us. And I do think, though, it most likely goes here chronologically as well as thematically. But anyway, John chapter 10. Let's see. Most assuredly I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And when he brings out his own sheep, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. Yet they will by no means follow a stranger, but will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. Jesus used this illustration, but they did not understand the things which he spoke to them. So after this interaction with the leaders of the Jews and the way they treated this man, this formerly blind man who just wanted to speak the truth about Jesus, Jesus starts talking about the door to the flock and robbers and thieves. It's no accident that this interaction is immediately followed by some talk about robbers and thieves, people who are self-interested. And apparently in the Greek text, the words that are translated robbers and thieves have a little bit of different, I suppose, slant of meaning or weight of meaning. One of them is a reference to someone who takes by force, and the other one by stealth. But we're talking about the same thing, people who are plundering others for their own benefit. And he says, okay, anyone who doesn't go in through the door of the sheepfold, all right, that's a thief. Obviously, if they're not a thief, they don't need to be going in by some other way. And remember that, I didn't bring any or come up with any pictures. I know Steve has shown some pictures of sheepfolds at times. They made it hard to get into by any place other than the gate or the door, because they wanted to protect the sheep from wild animals, among other things, and also from thieves, obviously. So it's not easy to get into a sheepfold by any route other than the gate. Sometimes there were briars. Sometimes they would stack thick briars and thorns around the wall to discourage, to keep animals out. And that, if you're trying to get in through that way, then you obviously do not want to go through the door. And Jesus says, people who aren't coming in to the sheepfold by the gate, they're not coming in by the appropriately appointed way and in the appropriate manner, they're not there for the good of the flock or for the sake of righteousness or for God's sake. They're there to plunder. And the sheep, they know who their shepherd is. Notice that there's a twofold responsibility in this. The flock obviously is God's people. There's a twofold responsibility. There's the responsibility of the one who goes in to the flock to do so in the right way, and there's a responsibility of the flock to know the voice of the shepherd, to know their shepherd. For the sheep, they come by that naturally. You feed them, you take care of them, and they know who you are. For us, it's not quite as natural, because we have some responsibility of familiarizing ourselves with our shepherd so that we know his voice, so that we are not deceived by some other voice or some other words or some other attempt, someone else who would take the place of the shepherd for their own gain and not for the sake of the flock. So Jesus uses this illustration in verse 6, and they don't really know what he's saying. People are quite confused by this, but still he sticks with the he sticks with the metaphor for a time. The good thing about today's class is we get to 2 of the I am statements. There are 7 in John, and we get to look at 2 of them today, and the 2 are related. I mean, very closely related, so they kind of flow one from the other. In verse 7, let's see. Then Jesus said to them, again, most assuredly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved, and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come that they may have life, and that they may have it more abundantly. So Jesus identifies himself as the door. Okay, to make this a little clearer, I'm the door. Anybody who came before me, well, they weren't coming by the door, so they're thieves and robbers. They didn't come into the sheep by me, that is, by Jesus' authority and by his teaching and his example. They didn't come to the sheep by me. They came in to destroy. Now, it's a little difficult to me to figure out, well, I should say, those who came before could mean a number of different things. There are some who say that he's actually indicting the prophets who had come before, because they came in a manner of leading God's people, and therefore, since they came before Jesus, they must have been thieves and robbers. But Jesus, on more than one occasion in his teaching, validates the work of the prophets. So it can't be that, because Jesus clearly does not consider them thieves and robbers. It could be that he's referring to false messiahs. There have been several of those already, people who came in pretending to have the role that Jesus fills, to be the Messiah, and they were obviously not coming in by the door. They were coming in by under false pretenses and by false means, and they were coming for their own benefit. And even if their intention was not death and destruction of the flock, they brought that to them. So these are false. These also were thieves and robbers, because there's only one way into the flock, and that is through Jesus. And that means 2 things in an attempt. Let's see. Yeah, there's only one entrance for those, for people who will go to the flock, who intend to lead the flock. Well, they have to go in they have to get to the flock through Jesus. They have to go to them by his authority and by his example, and lead the flock the way Jesus would lead the flock. So the Jews had leaders at that time who were obviously not leading by the example and by the authority that Jesus had given. They were doing their own thing. As we see clearly, they persecuted this man who was trying to speak the truth. This is one reason I think this reflects directly back toward what we just witnessed, or what we just read about in chapter 9. This clearly is an indictment of the Jewish leaders, and they had just done something. They had attempted to dissuade, to persecute a man who had just become a disciple of Jesus, a man who had just become a believer. They tried to persecute, and by threat of expulsion from the synagogue, get him to speak something that was not true and that he did not believe to be true. And he would have none of it, so they persecuted him. These are the kinds of leaders that are not attempting to lead the flock for the benefit of the flock. Clearly, they're doing this for their own benefit. In Jesus' case, he is a threat to them. They have a leadership position, and they're using it for their own benefit, whether it's for their own financial gain, or whether it's for position, or for prestige, or respect that you get, that people give them. They were using that position and using the flock thereby in order to bring them honor or bring them the things that they wanted. Let's see. I got a little bit off from where I wanted to be, and now there's one passage that I'm looking for. Yes. Okay, I meant to, on the previous slide, I meant to make a reference to Ezekiel. So I want to turn over to Ezekiel chapter 34 real quickly. Ezekiel 34 is sort of something along these lines. Ezekiel's writing also to the leaders, the shepherds of the flock. They're called that explicitly in this text. And he's trying to get across to them the fact that the flock was not theirs to exploit for their own purposes. They did not own the sheep themselves. They were, well, that doesn't work well with the metaphor that Jesus is using, but the flock was not just there for their own use and for their own good. They had a responsibility. And so in Ezekiel chapter 34, and the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, Thus says the Lord God to the shepherds, Woe to the shepherds of Israel who feed themselves. Should not the shepherds feed the flocks? You eat the fat and clothe yourselves with the wool. You slaughter the fatlings, but you do not feed the flock. The weak you have not strengthened, nor have you healed those who were sick, nor bound up the broken, nor brought back what was driven away, nor sought what was lost, but with force and cruelty you have ruled them. So they were scattered because there was no shepherd, and they became food for all the beasts of the field when they were scattered. My sheep wandered through all the mountains and on every high hill. Yes, my flock was scattered over the whole face of the earth, and no one was seeking or searching for them. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. As I live, says the Lord God, surely, because my flock became a prey, and my flock became food for every beast of the field, because there was no shepherd, nor did my shepherds search for my flock, but the shepherds fed themselves and did not feed my flock. Therefore, O shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against the shepherds, and I will require my flock at their hand. I will cause them to cease feeding the sheep, and the shepherds shall feed themselves no more. For I will deliver my flock from their mouths, that they may no longer be food for them. For thus says the Lord God, Indeed, I myself will search for my sheep and seek them out. As a shepherd seeks out his flock on the day he is among his scattered sheep, so will I seek out my sheep and deliver them from all the places where they were scattered on a cloudy and dark day, and I will bring them out from the peoples and gather them from the countries, and I will bring them to their own land. I will feed them on the mountains of Israel, in the valleys, and in all the inhabited places of the country. I will feed them in good pasture, and their fold shall be on the high mountains of Israel. There they shall lie down in a good fold and feed in rich pasture on the mountains of Israel. I will feed my flock, and I will make them lie down, says the Lord God. So when the Lord spoke through Ezekiel, he said very much what Jesus is saying here. Okay, you shepherds have been using the sheep for your own gain. You've been using the sheep to make you fat. And when it came to the responsibilities that you had to the flock, to the work you had to do for them, to what you were entrusted by, you haven't done it. You haven't done any of the things that require you to make a sacrifice on the part of the flock. To see, you've never seen yourself as God's agent for the good, for the caretaking of his people. And therefore, you have allowed catastrophe and calamity to fall upon them. You have actually brought your own catastrophe and calamity upon them. You have taken only what you could from them, and you have not given any. You have taken and not given. And so the Lord says he's against the shepherds. This is not, the passage doesn't really emphasize the punishment that God intends for his shepherds, only that he's against them and that he's going to take the flock away from them. And then he talks about, well, I'm going to go search myself for my flock. What is Jesus doing? I mean, when we're reading about him in John, he is doing exactly what God said he would do here in Ezekiel chapter 34. He's exactly doing it. He is himself, God himself, is searching for his flock, is walking through the mountains and the valleys of Israel and searching for them and finding them, feeding them on the mountains, in the valleys, making them lie down in the pasture. He's protecting them. He's taking care of them. He is doing everything that the shepherds were supposed to be doing and were not. So Jesus is showing now in his words and also in all the things that he's done what the leaders of the people of Israel were supposed to be doing and were not. So Jesus uses, obviously the shepherd metaphor is, I don't know if anyone has ever looked, I know people have studied metaphors in the Bible, but I don't know if anyone has just gone through and counted the number of times a particular metaphor is used. I'm sure somebody has at some point. I just don't know about it. But I'm imagining if the shepherd metaphor is not the most common one, it is certainly near the top. This is used a lot in the 23rd Psalm. Here in Ezekiel, Jesus uses it. There are other places where we have reference to God acting toward his people as a shepherd acts toward his flock. And it's a very apt analogy as well. There's a book, it may be in the library. I think if it was years ago I checked this book out and read it. It may have, I suppose it could have fallen apart by now, but it's probably in there. It's called something like A Shepherd Looks at the 23rd Psalm. It was a man who had a lot of experience with sheep, looking at taking that experience and applying it to a sort of analysis of the 23rd Psalm. It may have been called A Shepherd Looks at the Shepherd Psalm, but I think it was A Shepherd Looks at the 23rd Psalm. And he was talking about his own experience with sheep and how people are like sheep. Sheep are dumb. They're just, they don't even have to get into trouble. They can just be in trouble. They just become, trouble grows up around them. They don't even have to go looking for it. It's just there. You can put them in a perfectly reasonable spot and they will find trouble. All kinds of ways that sheep just do dumb things. It's clear that they are domesticated animals. They are not meant to be out in the wild. They are food in the wild. That's what they are. Something, they're wolf food. So they have to be led and they have to be cared for. And if they're not, then they will find themselves in the most outrageous and unbelievable situations. You just don't know how they could do that. It's those of you who have pets understand that they need a little supervision. It's not that way with lots of animals. Human beings to God are so much like animals are to us that you think maybe God gave us those animals for the purpose of showing us our own folly. And in the reference of sheep, Jesus, we do see our own folly, and we see at the same time the goodness and righteousness, wisdom of God. So Jesus, to go back to the text again, Jesus is the door. We can say that through his authority, anyone who comes to the flock and operates as a leader or a teacher of the flock has to come through his authority and in his example and through his teaching. And for that matter, one of the words we use for elders is what? Shepherd. shepherd or pastor, I mean, that's by divine authority. You come to the flock, you address the flock, and in the way that that Jesus himself showed, and through his authority. And that's why there is in the religious world a lot of different ways there are a lot of different ways and manners of leading, of organizing the flock, and most of those are not by the door. They're not by the way that Jesus had taught. And so if you look around, if you look on television, quite often you'll see a few flocks that are organized with the shepherd in a different position. A single shepherd, a shepherd who is making lots and lots of money off the flock, and who is not teaching them the truth, is not feeding them, it is not carrying out his responsibility. The flock to him is a means of, he's a hireling. He is the one, we'll talk about in a minute, he's the one who's there for his own financial gain. Anyway, let's move on to verse 11 through 21. So Jesus just said he's the door. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. But a hireling, he who is not the shepherd, one who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf catches the sheep and scatters them. The hireling flees because he is a hireling and does not care about the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and I know my sheep and am known by my own. As the Father knows me, even so I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold. Them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. Therefore my Father loves me, because I lay down my life, that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. This command I have received from my Father. Therefore there was a division among the Jews because of these sayings. And many of them said, he has a demon, and is mad. Why do you listen to him? Others said, these are not the words of one who has a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? So Jesus says, okay, now I'm the good shepherd. So he's both the way to the sheep, and he is the good shepherd. He is the one who truly sees to the welfare of the sheep. So he is the example for every shepherd. He is a shepherd who is obviously tireless in his efforts to care for the sheep, to go and find the sheep, to bring the sheep back, to bind up the wounded, to feed the sheep, to keep the healthy, and to heal those who are injured. He is the example for every shepherd. He is the good shepherd, and ultimately he shows this, his goodness, his qualification as a shepherd is demonstrated in one specific act above all others, which is that he lays down his life for the sheep. Certainly we don't expect that of a shepherd, but we see here one of those cases where the metaphor, where the meaning is overtaking the original metaphor. There is no metaphor that truly shows what Jesus is willing to do and what he provides for his sheep. So Jesus has said, I will lay down my life for the sheep. Now the hireling, who has a financial motive, he's not going to lay down his life for the sheep. I mean, you don't pay. How many times have you ever said, I've said it myself, not in regards to a religious context, but how many times have we all said when dealing with some particular possibility, in our employment, I don't get paid enough for that. Like, no, not going in there, not doing that. You do not pay me enough to ask me to do that. This is the hireling. The hireling says, no, wolf, sheep, yes. You pay me to take care of the sheep. You don't pay me for wolves. Don't do wolves. So forget the wolves. The hireling runs away. The shepherd's love is manifested in his willingness to give his life for the protection, for the deliverance of the sheep. So Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. This is the second I am statement that we have, and I think these are the third and the fourth I am statements, if I've counted correctly. Jesus showing who he is in relation to his people. And here in this chapter we see he's demonstrating he's demonstrating his divinity in his relationship to his people, in his caring for them and his delivering of them and his giving them life, or his protecting his own creation. Jesus says, I will lay down my life for the sheep, and he's going to do that. And he also says, well, in this passage we're looking at here, I have other sheep. I mean, it's not just you. I have some other sheep, and I need to bring them together. And then, and that's a passage that has caused some controversy in religious circles over the years for a number of reasons. But once more, I think the reason is a deliberate, or at least a casual and careless misuse of the text. It seems that, I mean, what we teach, we might as well not go into all the ways that this could be misinterpreted, because that could take hours doing that. But the way that jumps up to most to us, that it is, I believe, correct, is that he has sheep that are not just of the Jewish flock. There are Gentiles also who are supposed to be part of his flock. Now, in one particular thing I was reading about on this subject, someone suggested that the word that is translated flock here, or fold, I believe, is actually the same word that is used for court. Now, when I went to do a quick Bible dictionary search and look at Strong's, I didn't see that explicitly listed as a meaning. So I can't verify that, but the point was, they said that Jesus was probably in the inner court of the temple when he's making this, where of course only the Jews could be. And he says, when he says that I have other sheep that are not of this fold or this court, it would be clear to the listeners that he's referring to the court of the Gentiles. So I have sheep that are not of the Jewish flock, but I have sheep among the Gentiles as well, and I'm going to bring them all together, and they're going to have there's going to be one fold. And it says in verse 16, they will hear my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. So what's the unifying, what is the unifying influence, or the thing that brings unity to everyone, Jew and Gentile? Jesus. They will hear my voice. This is what brings unity. Among all the different kinds of people in the world, the thing that unifies them is the voice of Jesus, or the words of Jesus. There were, I think it was maybe at a lectureship, it might have been Freed Hardeman several years ago. I think it was Tom Holland speaking. And he was talking about, he was reporting this as a second-hand conversation. Someone else had been, it's a few steps removed from the actual person. I don't remember who he said was the actual speaker of these words, but they were talking about the situation in the Middle East. It doesn't matter when that was, because throughout our lifetimes and other lifetimes, it's always been bad. So he's talking about the situation in the Middle East and how Jesus would, how Jesus would deal with that. And someone said, well, I know how Jesus would deal with it. He'd make brothers of those men, of the Jews and the Palestinians. Well, it's by the words of Jesus they would become united. They would become brothers by obedience to the shepherd, to the one shepherd, and being part of his flock. That's the only long-term effective unifying influence in the world, is the voice of Jesus. So Jesus says we'll have one shepherd, one flock. We'll all have the same words, so we all have the same doctrine, and that is unity. That is the only kind of unity that can exist on anything other than a superficial level. And then Jesus says, I lay down my life for the sheep. Therefore my Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it again. And he's in verse 18, no one takes it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. This command I have received from my Father. Jesus making it clear. When it happens, if you're listening, when he does die, people, if they remembered, which of course, they mostly didn't, and probably, neither would we if we'd been in that situation. But if they had remembered, they could have known, wait, his life is not being taken from him by force. He's up there on that cross of his own will. He is laying down his life for the sheep, and he has the power when, at the appropriate time to take his life back again by his own will, just as he laid it down. So we have a little bit of discord, a bit of division among those who heard. In verse 20, some people say, well, he has a demon. He's a madman. Lay down his life and take it back up. You can't do that. You can give your life. You can't take it back. So he has a demon. You remember in Acts chapter 2 what they said about the apostles when they started speaking in tongues? They're drunk. I do not drink, but honestly, if you offer me a glass of that, yeah, I'm going to take it. Because, what drink what kind of alcohol makes you able to speak languages that you have never studied? Now, I'm not saying what kind of alcohol makes you think that you could speak a language that you've never studied. That's not too hard. But to actually be able to speak it, all right, that's something. That is a brewing process that we do not have in Kentucky. But, so no, they weren't drunk. And anyone who was there thinking clearly and honestly could say, no, that is not the effect of alcohol that we are hearing. Well, the same thing here. Some people say, he has a demon. He's mad. Why do you listen to him? Others said, these are not the words of one who has a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? So verse 21, why do you suppose that verse is included here? Because there is nothing in the Gospel of John that more clearly shows people reacting the way John intends them to than this verse. John said at the beginning, I'm writing all of this so that you believe. If you look through the Gospel of John, you will see many times a simple request. Come and see, or come and hear. Look, Jesus is this a Messiah? Well, come listen. Come see what he's come see him. Come hear him. There's a reason that John presents 7 signs and 7 I am sayings. It is the perfect balance of word and deed. John is trying to tell us, come hear what Jesus says and come see what he does. Hear his words, see his actions, open your ears, open your eyes, open your mind, and the rest is easy. And the people who he quotes here in verse 21 are doing exactly that. Someone says he's a demon, or he has a demon. It's like, wait a minute, this is not the way a demon, these are not the words. What he says is not what a demon would say. And can a demon, look what he's doing. Demons can't heal the blind. That's another reason, by the way, that I think this probably follows directly on chapter 9, because it's a reference back to that particular man that Jesus, whose eyes Jesus opened, although it's certainly possible that he had healed another blind man in between. But this is what John intended for his gospel to accomplish, for people to hear Jesus' words and to see his deeds and to think clearly about them. And the chapter 9 was also an example of that. This blind man, this man who, having been born blind and been a beggar his whole life, had not been educated, had not been, was not one of the elite people, was certainly not one of the leaders of the Jews, to see what Jesus did and to hear what he said and to make a rational conclusion from it. And now in chapter 10, that is exactly what John is trying to tell us to do here in verse 21. Just listen, just see, and then just use your head, and you'll be fine. Don't let fear, don't be cheated out of what God is trying to give you because of the fear or pride or anything else that might come into it. Just see, hear, and use your head. So I will tell Bart where we got, and I'll pick back up there next week. Thank you all very much.